Jack Mitchell, we have reached the top 60 in the Groin Kick Chronicles, and I know that this 10 is going to feature a couple of games that you think are a bit too low on the rankings. The math's not working out for you.
I see at least two right away, right off the bat, that I think are too low.
Well, I look forward to discussing those with you. Number 60 through 51, we will start with 2017 Wisconsin at number 60. Number 59 is the 2022 loss to Michigan. Number 58 is the 2019 loss to Minnesota. That was a bad time. 57, the 2019 loss to Indiana. 56 was the 2017 loss to Northern Illinois. Number 55 was the 2015 Halloween loss to Purdue. Number 54, another 2019 game, Wisconsin. Number 53, the COVID defeat to the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Another Minnesota game at 52. That's the Bill Moose oh no game from 2017. And then finally, the 2023 Colorado game, Matt Rule's second ever game at number 51. Where do we begin on this list? As you said, you got some bones to pick.
Now, I think I have got a bone to pick that not maybe other people will.
Okay.
But for me, I do. And this is just kind of going back to my memory. And am I able to remember a specific moment of agony? And I can I can for a few of these, but number 60, 2017 Wisconsin.
Yes.
So what I remember about this was I still had hope.
For the Mike Riley era?
Yes, I still had hope for the Mike Riley era. I was very, very much already then. I was just desperate for a victory against Wisconsin at that point. It felt like it had been a long time even then. You know, it wasn't that far then since the blowout they had against the Bopolini Huskers even, right? And you still had the game that we had mentioned in one of the previous episodes that will come up later, I'm sure, in the 2016 Wisconsin game as well.
Yeah.
So, like, I wanted a win here, and as I recall, there was a pick six for Nebraska
to tie it
in that game, to tie the game in the third quarter, right?
Yeah.
And they got that, and I remember watching that game in my basement with my son and looking at the pandemonium that I at least perceived or I wanted to believe was happening at Memorial Stadium at that point, and thinking, here it is. It's back. Mm-hmm. Memorial Stadium magic. This place, it's back. It's 2014 Miami again, right? This place is going to be just a house of freaking horrors for Wisconsin in the second half after that pick six. And guess what? They scored two more touchdowns. The game ended.
They had two plays the rest of the game where they threw the ball. Wisconsin ran the ball down Nebraska's throat.
Absolutely demoralized them.
I was actually outside the stadium that day. It was a bachelor party for my best friend, and so we watched in the North Bottoms in a tailgate lot, so the game is happening 10 seconds in front of what we're seeing on whatever satellite we're watching. When that moment happened, the fireworks immediately shoot off. And I remember all of us standing like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And you see the throw, and immediately you realize it's about to be a pick six. And sure enough, it was.
One of the interesting things that we do after this project could be looking at the could have been greatest Husker plays of all time. And that pick six would be one of them. But a whole bunch of these losses have these moments that looked like they were, oh man, we're always going to remember that one. Mm-hmm. What a great play for Nebraska. And then they were kind of heaped on the trash bin because there wasn't a win. So that's one that stuck out to me right off the bat. 2020. Then there's a few on here, Josh, that I completely expected as well.
In terms of to be this low.
Yeah, in fact, like 2022 Michigan is next on the list. I would have thought that might have been in the bottom 10.
Dude, that game is one of the just most forgettable games of this whole era of football.
It was. First of all, the lame duck situation, but it was never close, but it was also never a embarrassing blowout, right? It was kind of a weirdly boring game. You didn't ever really go in with hope, and the game never gave you hope, right? You never had the signature bring you up so you can get knocked down moment in that 2022 Michigan game.
The one thing, Jack, that works most in Nebraska's favor, or I guess why this game is a little higher than I think you and I both remember it, the total yards disparity got an 8 out of 10 on our scale.
Oh, so it was close.
No, because they outgained them by 266 yards.
It went so far the other way.
It swung so far that it ended up getting our third highest total yards disparity ranking. But otherwise, you're right. I mean, it was a good team. Michigan, Nebraska doesn't have the rivalry factor with them that we build into so many of the other teams' rankings, like a Wisconsin, for example. I mean, they dominated the entire time. The margin of victory falls within this band where it's like, yeah, I mean, a 31-point loss is a bummer, but it's not the worst thing in the world. And yeah, if you could apply lame duck, nobody really cares, the 2022 Michigan game literally could be last on this entire list.
And then you got a few games that were just blowouts, right? Where there was just never a moment. 2019 Minnesota, is that the hoodie game?
That's the hoodie game.
That's what I remember. I can't tell you. I can tell you it was terrible weather.
Mm-hmm.
I think J.D. Spielman had one good catch in that game, or a couple of good catches. He was Nebraska's best offensive weapon. But I'm looking at like just blowouts that were almost somewhat expected, and so they weren't even that terrible. I would say that one.
And Jack, that one, to dive a little deeper, all of Minnesota's touchdowns are like under 20 yards every single time. So like, a lot of the games that are on this list are going to feature that like 80-yard score that really annoys people. That was just workmanlike, that game. Right. That was like the true, I know we talked about on the first episode that the Purdue loss in year one for Scott Frost was the first time that we were like, oh, that's kind of weird. This was the game, and the Colorado game, of course, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Mm-hmm. Those two games that year were the ones where I was like, wow, this is just nowhere near what I was thinking that the Scott Frost era was going to look like.
Right, and it was still in the beginning end of it. Yeah. The other one I put in just the blowout where there was no hope, that 2017 Minnesota game, which was when you knew it. If there was any doubt left that it was over, you knew it was then. In fact, I remember at the second half of that game, I was like, well, I'm kind of done watching this.
Yeah.
Something new is coming up next. I think I even have a tweet to that effect, like, I'm ready to start moving on.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, because a lot of these 2017 games are such ass whoopings that like they're not going to end up at the top of the list, right? You were not as all in on Scott Frost as I would have expected, and as we went through your tweets and you're reading tweets from 2017, you are kind of like you Scott Frost people are pretty annoying to me right now. Maybe you're going to end up being right. Are you sure you're going to be right? Because nothing good ever happens to this program. And you were very much a believer until the bitter end in Mike Riley. Why do you think that was the case?
Well, I think I probably had some skepticism that it just wasn't going to work out.
Sure.
To get Scott
Did
Frost.
you think that they were going to be able to land him? Is that what it was?
Yeah, I just thought something was going to interfere and it wasn't going to happen, or he didn't really want to come, which he didn't, turns out. So I guess I was
Shout out to Jack Mitchell on
Not
that
that
one.
anybody wants to hear about that, but turns out. And I really wanted the Riley thing to work. And I know I'm kind of rare in that, but I certainly had some skepticism about it working. I didn't think it was necessarily a home run, but I wanted it to. Mm-hmm. I think in part because he was likable, right? And I mean,
he's a nice guy.
He was likable, and there was even some sort of inside baseball stuff where I got great access to him. That kind of thing that I haven't gotten from any other coach before or after.
You haven't? You don't talk to him, but you're the
I have done interviews from since I started on the radio in 2006 of non-Riley football coaches. I have had one interview with them, and it was Matt Rule.
And that was right before his first season, wasn't
Matt
it?
Rule.
Yeah.
Yep. And I bet I had 7 with Mike Riley.
Wow.
So 7.
Bring back
Riley,
Mike Riley, says Jack
all
Mitchell.
The rest of them. So yeah, I had tons of that. So I was kind of on his side because of that. So that would be the other one. And speaking of Mike Riley, that 2015 Purdue game, there's another one. It was just kind of early in a career blowout. In the thing there's 2 things I remember about that is the DPE injury, right? And that game, we were talking about this game recently. It was actually closer. It ended closer than I realized. There was wasn't it like 10 points by the end?
10 points, 55 to 45.
Put up a ton of points.
Yes.
in that game. But I remember that was on Halloween 2015, and the Royals won Game 4 of the World Series.
And then they won the World Series the next day.
Night. And then they won the World Series the next day.
So that's 5 games that we hit on that you just kind of mentioned. You thought that they would be down here, and that's the Wisconsin 17, Michigan 22, Minnesota 19, Purdue 15, and Minnesota 17.
Yep.
But it seems like the other 5, you're like, how in the hell are they this low low on the list.
I think that's right. I don't know if I got all of them, but there's a few for sure that I feel that way. So
what's the first one that stands out to you?
The first one, when you handed me the card when I looked at it at the end of last episode, was 2017 Northern Illinois. And I get how it might not meet the metrics that we have set up, but and I guess the feeling of despair, like, man, like of giving up on. Now, I said I really gave up after that Minnesota game, but I think truly I probably really gave up after that Northern Illinois game, because when you left, you're like, the reality set in that, like, we're going to have to go through this all again. We're going to have to go through firing a coach again.
They fired the AD a few days later.
And we're going to have to go through this entire process that it feels like we just went through. And then hopefully we get the right guy then at that point. Well,
yeah,
it was happening yet again. Like, I was already feeling, I remember riding down the escalator at that game and I think that might be my tweet about this game. I remember riding just down the escalator after that game and just realizing, well, buckle up. It's going to be a long couple of years.
Yeah, the only thing really that bumped this game up oddly was the yardage disparity, because Nebraska won the yardage in that game by over
terrible
100
turnovers,
and then they had the turnovers, and then it was a close game. But in terms of the math of it and how the game unfolds, it's one of those games where, because of those pick sixes that happened so early in the game, Nebraska does end up taking the lead in the second half, which I had forgotten until I was going through this project. But then Northern Illinois answers right away. The thing that I remember most, were you there? Were you at that game?
Yep.
Was Les Miles as the commentator.
Oh, and all of because that was before Frostmania had started to some degree.
Yeah, and so Les Miles, remember, his son was on the team, and Les is like, at one point he's like, oh no, not Nebraska. Like, he's sad about Nebraska, and Tim Brando's like, well, folks, his son's on the team. Like, it was one of the most uncomfortable broadcasts.
That's right.
Dude, even finding the highlights for this one, Les Miles is stepping all over him. So, yeah, that game, you're right. If you could somehow bake into the, oh no, you keep calling the moments the oh shit moments, this has that for an era. Oh
yes,
no! This is, we're moving in a direction that some people were hoping for, but certainly you were not.
It was, in some ways, it was almost like the one that we'll have later on here, the Ireland loss, right?
Yes,
it was
100%.
It was the Mike Riley Ireland loss,
definitely,
to some degree.
Yeah, it really was. I was a little surprised that one was ranked as low as it was. The one that I mentioned at the end of last episode that I was stunned is at number 53 is the COVID loss to Minnesota. And Jack, you said it on our first full episode. The COVID losses, maybe they get moved down a little bit in our memories because it was such a strange year, right? But that game comes in December, and Nebraska plays a Minnesota team that has half of their roster. The game was almost canceled because of COVID, and they get physically beat up in a way that, only happens on this list against teams like Michigan or Ohio State, and maybe some of those Wisconsin teams. That Minnesota team dominated, and they didn't have very many guys.
To me, it is the biggest. I know it's not going to come out this way in the ranking. You can take the Iowa game even too. To me, this is the biggest groin kick of the COVID season, and
more than Illinois even.
Yeah, but because it's sort of in a meta way that you can't measure, but it's because you went into it and you had this factor going in where Nebraska seems to get. We talked about trying to measure this factor a little bit when we were talking about it, where Nebraska gets kind of a cheat, is the way that I would say it, as in starting quarterback is injured for the other team, and you think, oh, here this comes. Or in this case, half the team's not playing for Minnesota. You're like, well, we needed time to dominate, and then unfortunately, there's several of those games where Nebraska got one of these cheats, and you lost despite the cheat. That's kind of another unique groin kick factor.
Isn't one of the through lines of this entire project for you that, like, other teams get to experience, whether it's a top 10 win or just the joy of a normal year, other teams get to experience the joy of, oh, thank God, it's kind of an easy win. We're gonna go in and out, and we're gonna move on with our day. And you didn't even get that in a COVID game that. I bet if you found other matchups in 2020 that had the kind of similarities where one team just didn't have a lot of guys and the other team did, you would see the team that had the players win more often than not.
I think we thought Nebraska was favored if Minnesota was full strength going into that game.
Yeah.
And then they wiped out the entire and man, it was rough.
Yeah,
it was rough.
It certainly was. The other few games that we have not talked about yet on this one that I wanted to dive into was the 2019 Indiana game. As people heard on your tweet a few minutes ago, the obligatory Jack Mitchell tweet, this was a game where going in, you didn't really have any feelings about Indiana. You left the game having feelings about Indiana because that was a Tom Allen Indiana team.
Yeah.
And now, all these years later, I would say that you still feel that exact same way about the Hoosiers.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember too many plays from this game. I remember Nebraska wore black jerseys, and I was particularly pissed because I thought the jerseys finally they hit the right note on the alternates. They looked so good
with the black shirts on the sleeves,
and then they're like they're never going to wear them again. Correct. And then they wore them the next year, and they still lost again. But so I remember that part of it, and then I remember the things you just mentioned. Tom Allen, first of all, after the game, listen. Let me defend Scott Frost here for a moment.
Oh.
I can't even remember what was the comment about the schedule that we wouldn't about wanting to not play Ohio State but instead having Indiana or something like that.
Yeah, and they took this
took
little
it personally.
Kernel. Yeah,
and it was so. And look, I wish Nebraska did those things sometimes, but they got offended by the dumbest thing.
Yeah,
and they obviously twisted it in a way to use it as motivation, which great teams do. But it annoys you if you're a fan of the other team. And the other thing is, they faked a bunch of injuries in that game. They were faking injuries that
guys just dropping for no reason.
Yeah, they're going to legislate that out of the game this year. If we would have had it that year, Tom Allen wouldn't have been able to cheat.
Yeah, and wasn't that one of those games too where you were probably arguing with Husker fans on Twitter who were then defending them using the motivation? And Jack, you actually shouldn't get mad at them for using motivation. It seems like something that would have happened.
It very much seems
for
possible.
You. The only two games, Jack, that we have not talked about on the on this list. 2019 Wisconsin and 2023 Colorado. Should we save Colorado for last before we get out for this episode and talk about the Wisconsin loss?
Sure.
Another kind of forgettable loss. The thing that I remember most from that one is waking up and scrolling on Twitter and finding out Bill Moose extended Scott Frost, but they're not very good this year. Why on earth did he extend him? And that was one where Nebraska kind of played pretty well at times. There was a kickoff that Cruikshank returned for a time.
That's the first thing I think of is Cruikshank. When I was at this game, Cruikshank. First thing I think
Looked
of.
like a nice day at
What
least.
do you know? A special team.
That shows up with Wisconsin.
Another through line, a special teams breakdown.
Yeah, and that was Jonathan Taylor's last game against Nebraska, and he had another 200-yard performance. So it was, you said it. We had the tweet after the loss in 2018, and you'll hear this later on in the series. But when that happened, a lot of us thought Nebraska's never losing to Wisconsin again. And then the very next year, it's like, well, never mind. Maybe they'll never beat Wisconsin again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sad.
Let's get to Colorado before we wrap this episode up. Number 51, the second Matt Rule game. I think it's fitting that it's this low. I know that there are some people who are probably saying there's no way in hell this game should be a whole lot higher. But I think it's just because Colorado, on a play-by-play, it really was not. But wow, if you could go back to the moment in time of the consternation of the fan base after that loss of like, oh my gosh, does Deion Sanders have it figured out and Matt Rule doesn't? Yeah. Did him bringing in 20 players from the portal or whatever it was that actually the play that Nebraska should have made?
There's no way that our model could have measured. It did measure the disdain for Colorado, but there's no way it could have measured the culture of the current news cycle at that time and Deion Sanders.
The culture of the current news cycle.
Of the news cycle at that time and Deion Sanders. And, in some ways, Josh, we're going to talk about those first couple of weeks of Deion's. There was nothing like that.
No.
It was wild.
Yeah.
After that TCU game, he got up there and gave an interview like he had just won a pro wrestling match. And it was crazy. And for a moment, you had this, hey, their new guy, our new guy, and it felt a little like good versus evil again, like Nebraska and Oklahoma in the 80s to some degree.
Yeah, you're going to have to wait a little bit before we get to the 2023 loss to Minnesota, but that combined with the Colorado win versus TCU, and then you remember how all offseason there was, I don't know how to describe the excitement or lack thereof for Rule. I think it was tepid. The Frost era did a number on some people, but there was one thing I think most of us agreed on, and that was there's no way in hell they're going to go to Boulder and lose that game. And so I remember that 48-hour period of loss, Colorado win, and suddenly I'm waking up on Monday morning getting ready for my radio show, and I'm thinking, wow, this week has turned into one that I did not expect at all. And then that game, I mean, they kind of toyed with Nebraska. And that was, I mean, really the end of the Jeff Sims era in that game where you heard the highlight in the earlier part of this episode. The announcers are openly like, do they need to bench this guy? And then he literally turns it over 5 seconds after they're talking about needing to bench him.
Yeah.
Yikes. So that is 60-51. Jack, we're about to dive into the top 50 on our next episode. As always, as we finish up each episode of the Groin Kick Chronicles, you have the list of games next to you. Why don't you flip that over and maybe get mad at me for how low a game is? I'm curious already for your reaction to number 50. A team. Number 50 will be pretty interesting on the next episode. Maybe a game that we actually just mentioned is going to show up. More of Nebraska's rivals, Jack, are gonna show up hot and heavy on the next episode of the Groin Kick Chronicles.
I see one that's higher that I thought we would have discussed already that is on there.
That's exciting.
Yeah, you're right. 50. That makes me feel very bitter and very angry just seeing that.
How about 50 and 42? Same team, 50 and 42. That they're both.
We might have spoiled who it is.
Yeah, perhaps we did.
Oh God, yeah, that's. Oh man, no way. 42 for that one. Wow. Yep. Okay, we'll talk about it next episode, but I've got thoughts on that one.
We will talk about that on the next episode. Of course, we don't recommend, but we do say if you want to watch highlights from these games, and it's not always bad, but they are available at Husker Mac.
Right.
You can go check out the highlights.
Pick six, maybe.
Yeah, you can see that we plug in the numbers. If you're wondering, okay, guys, you keep mentioning total yards disparity or whatever. Like, what is the formula? Well, it's all available for you right there, and you can check all of those out. But yeah, we have now done 20 games, and in our next episode, we will get into the top 50. Jack, we're getting closer to some real pain. I mean, we've already talked about pain, but we're inching a little bit closer to real hell.
Boy, I can't wait.
Yeah, we're all very excited. That's coming up next time on the Groin Kick Chronicles.